Luiz is from
Yep.
Brazil, and he's done a lot of work in hydro scheduling with Mario Pereira at PSR, and also worked in the Brazilian government. You may tell us a bit about that. So, thank you, Luiz.
Yeah. Okay. So hello everyone, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Dan, Andy, and Chris, and Natalia, she's not here, but thanks so much for inviting me to be back to the game of this research world. I joined at PSR, this company, like 20 years ago, and I was a little kid, much smaller than I am now. Became a big fan of Ben Hobbs, big fan of Andy, of you all. I worked in this company for like 18 years, so I left the company in 2016. I went to the Brazilian government, and for 2 years I had a role which was like, I was the vice minister on the technical affairs on the Ministry of Energy, handling biofuels, electricity, gas, oil, everything. And then I quit the government, thanks God, last year, and then I rejoined PSR. So for 2 years I had the pleasure of actually seeing how the sausages are done, and how, I would say, so much, sometimes little appreciation for the technical affairs that brings us all here are taken into account when doing policy making and when doing stuff in the real world. So it was a very fascinating, very humbling experience, but I had to come back to the energy industry as to PSR, and this is a unique opportunity that I have to kind of taking the dust out of my body on this research field. So my presentation will be a bit different from what we've been seeing throughout the day of today, and also a little bit from yesterday, because this is going to be a very light presentation focused on applications. So basically I will talk about a lot of stuff that you all have developed during your careers, that we have been implementing in this firm to do practical studies in the industry. So my experience here is basically to share with you the challenges which are common to model the real world. And I come from this place here, that's the town of Rio. So this is where we are. And, well, no, because this is what we see, this is what I see from my window. So this was just to make you all envious, okay? So, but we are a strange company. We are a consulting company, but not a classic consulting company. We see ourselves more as a research company. We have a staff of about 85 researchers, and we've been doing a lot of stuff on energy analytics, on modeling, on policy development in almost 75 countries all over the globe. So we are very popular in Latin America and also in Asia, pretty much the countries that have had historically a lot of activities on hydro development, but more recently we have been going to other places in the world as well. And we are a company, we are completely privately owned, and we do a lot of collaborations with universities, we take PhD students, so I also take this opportunity to put this company available for you all in case you guys are interested in exchanging technical ideas, but also having topics for further research. And the context of this presentation is basically what was told us by Professor Newberry yesterday in the morning, is the context of the forward contracting via electricity auctions, which have been playing a tremendous role in bringing new generation capacity to ensure supply adequacy or renewable development in many countries. The World Bank and IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, they have been advocating a lot towards this. This is a book that I wrote in 2009, which basically started to put those concepts in a more formal way. And this is a guide that IRENA did that's very interesting, that is basically how to design an auction which draws a lot from the theoretical experience, theoretical and practical experience on this as well, that have been used in many countries. In Latin America, the auctions, the forward contracting auctions basically are the way to go, because the spot prices, they are very volatile because of the hydro predominance in many of those countries. This makes financing of a new generation investments very challenging. And so what Latin America has is a very active investment market This is a nomenclature given by Professor Peter Crampton when he worked in Colombia, which is, I think, describes very well what was created there, which is basically a set of regular auctions for long-term commitments carried out ahead of delivery, and sometimes exclusive for new capacity, where the underlying product is a reliability product, which can take form of a reliability option or a contract tied to some sort of a firm energy or a firm capacity certificate. Some countries bundled this reliability product with the energy contract. Some countries, they define the reliability needs centrally. Some others, they define the reliability needs in a distributed way. And in some countries, the government poses explicit energy policy preferences in the procurement process. So there are countries that say, I just want to procure renewables. Other countries that do technology, full technology specific arrangements, and so forth. But in the end of the day, this has created a concept, which is the concept of the competition for the market, where basically the investors, they compete to enter the market. Once they are in the market, they have already secured most part of their revenue streams that they need for financing. And this has become very, very liquid and very interesting in Latin America, but also in many other countries more recently. I was very pleased when I came across this paper by Professor Newberry, which is a very recent one, about a year ago, where he analyzed the lessons from the energy market reform in the UK. And Professor Newberry was very, I would say, in a very nice way, he was able to contextualize this new wave of energy procurement, of the auction-based way in the European context. So he basically advocates quite a lot. I have here just some prints of the article with the most interesting sentences that at least are interesting for this presentation. But in the end of the day, Professor Newberry advocates very much that the auctions are very interesting forms to bring new capacity, that this should not be seen as a coming back to the central electricity generating board or to fully central planning, but that there are issues in the auctions that should be better taken into account and better analyzed. So the truth is that in many countries this virus-based arrangement for contracting energy has spread out very well, and Brazil has been sourcing renewables for very cheap prices, 20 to 40 bucks on wind and solar. Mexico has been sourcing wind and solar for very cheap price as well. But Brazil does auctions for all technologies, so we have been auctioning gas, hydros, small hydros, and biomass plants, whereas Mexico has been using the auctions just to contract more renewables. So, but the global experience is very diversified. And one interesting thing is that while the auctions, they were developed under the technology neutrality concept, the truth is that many countries have been doing technology-specific auctions. So here you have a map which is appearing in a new IRENA report that is coming just in a few more weeks, which shows how the different procurement types have been employed worldwide. And here I show you only the main auction program for each country. So for instance, the US has different auction programs, the EU has different auction programs as well, but the technology is specific either for a single project or for a single source. For instance, I need to buy this wind farm in this specific site, or I need to buy renewables, for example, and out of the renewables I want to buy more wind. This is spreading out as a virus, as I mentioned before. And the objective of this presentation, which is an ongoing research, by the way, is basically we started in the company, and actually in my days in the government, to start to interpret the auction mechanism as a way to find the most desirable system expansion that would come somehow from an optimization problem as the one that Claudia has just presented us. So if I can somehow have this big optimization method or big optimization model that can represent the whole thing and gives us some proxy for how the future system should look like, I could try to use an auction arrangement to procure some way this mix, but at the same time trying to use the auction for first the identification of the desirable attributes from a planning perspective, to quantify those attributes, and to formalize these attributes in the auction itself, which I don't think I'll have time to go to present here. But the main idea, the main topic we've been investigating is this. We think that with advanced algorithms for energy planning, very interesting results can be achieved nowadays for really large-scale systems out of planning models that can be used somehow as a handicaps in the auctions to drive a little bit the auctions towards a solution that would come from a planning exercise. That's why I have called my presentation as Harmonizing Energy Planning with a Market Mechanism. Of course, that I'm using an assumption, an explicit assumption, that a planning model would be able to capture the big picture of the system of the future, but I will go through this in a few more slides. So, and I think that this framework can help to shed some light on decisions that have been taken, in my humble view, in a completely nonsense way. Some countries have been deciding to buy this and that amount from this and that technology without making too much calculations, and this conditions the way that the future energy matrix evolves. And by using at least an optimization model, those decisions can be better taken, or at least the consumer can be very well informed about how the system is looking like in the future. So my goal in the end of the day would be to carry out just technology neutral auctions, but with explicit pricing of the different attributes of the different sources. Some countries are doing this already. Brazil is one, Mexico is the other one, but the functioning of this arrangement as for today is still not well done. There is a need of a lot of perfection on this. So my presentation, I'll go quickly through these 4 items. I'll go back to the basics on the planning arrangements, and then connecting planning with the auctions, and then how to harmonize the whole thing, and then let's see if we can conclude something useful. So back to the basics, and coming back to the concepts of the energy planning that Claudia has well presented us before. This is basically the set of the multiple objectives of energy supply: minimize consumer tariff, which is the sum of the cost minimization of the system, but also of the generator remuneration of in the system, because the generator needs to collect revenues so that the whole expansion can become commercially viable, plus natural infrastructure costs, subject to a set of uncertainties, the knowns unknowns, and also the unknowns, which calls for some resilience analysis, and energy policy directives that sometimes come and affect the whole way that the future energy matrix is driven. In terms of modeling tools, the way that in an industrial perspective we have been handling this is we have one model that I won't detail, any of those models here, because my focus is more on the presentation, but we have a model that does an inventory analysis of the hydro bases and also of the renewable resources. So we basically want to identify candidated projects that can be used in the planning models to drive the system expansion. So there is an automated process for that. Once we have the candidated projects identified, we have worked a lot on multi-scale models for stochastic scenarios, for inflows, renewable production, and also for load, which goes on a yearly basis, on a monthly basis, weekly, until daily and hourly basis. That's why they are multi-scale. And here this is pure stochastic analysis. Then we optimize generation reserves and interconnections in the planning exercise with the probabilistic hourly simulation of the system operation and reliability evaluation. This connects later with a second phase of the planning exercise, which is the optimization of the transmission network investments, plus considering active and reactive power flow. Getting just a little deeper on the modeling itself, this is the general arrangement, but I won't spend a lot of time on this. The key message that I wanted to tell you are the following. First, the bottom line method that we use is the stochastic dual dynamic programming, which is seen as the stochastic multi-stage version of Bender's decomposition. So everything that we model is linearized, so we need to ensure convexity. So we try to convexify the real life problems as much as we can. This, of course, ensures some. We have costs when doing this, as the last presenter has just shown us. And one thing that we've been doing quite a lot is the representation of the dynamic probabilistic reserve, the time-varying probabilistic reserve design, which is super important when doing capacity expansion decisions with the renewables, because this is basically a way to represent the reserve requirements in a dynamic way and considering the probabilistic characteristic of the renewables adjusted for risk. So what we see in the model that Claudia has just presented when considering this type of a feature is that the interactions between the capacity expansion decisions and the reserves are very strong. So the model in one of the iterations decides to build a lot of renewables because they are cheap, but then the reserve requirements increase, and then the operation modules realize that there are expensive dispatchable generation to meet these reserves, and then there is a feedback by means of a Bender's cut to the planning model, so the decision to build renewables is re-evaluated and so forth. This has been a very interesting concept in many countries that have been advocating towards the incorporation of those things in the planning exercise. And I really won't get into the details on the modeling that we're doing. We can leave this for the Q&A. The same thing applies for the active and the reactive power planning, where for the reactive power planning we have been doing progressive hedging. We have at least been testing this, has been working well. And again, this is absolutely nothing new compared to the existing literature, but what has changed completely the life of the applications, at least for us, is when we come to this arrangement, is the possibility to parallelize the algorithms, because the Bender's decomposition is very much parallelizable. We have parallelized it, and we are running our applications in a cloud computing environment, which has changed and completed the paradigm, because then you can really start to run very large-scale applications as well. The planning thing has become very popular, again, it seems that the empire is striking back, but IRENA has been, again, advocating towards more planning studies in the presence of renewables in the systems of many countries. There is this very interesting campaign led by Danish in the German government, which basically is trying to reorganize the discussion on system planning. So in the year 2011, we are coming back to the same concepts that were introduced back in the day, but are being supported by a lot of governments from a lot of countries to try to level the playing field, at least in the competition on renewables. This has been a very interesting experience that we have been having. And just a few examples, we do all of this modeling. We have a lot of mathematical background behind it, and then we have the application. So just for you to have an idea what we have been doing, at least in PSR, this is one renewable penetration study that was supported by the Association of the Generators in Chile, that wanted to analyze how the system would behave under massive scenarios of renewable penetration. So they started with a fixed number, but then this number was increased a lot. And the type of results that we take out of this model is this, how capacity expansion will look like. In Chile, they can get to 75% renewable by 2030. This is the statistics on the solving time of the planning model. So we are speaking about roughly 240 minutes per year to solve the Chilean system. We use Express, and we are great friends of Michael Perregard. That helps us quite a lot to fine-tune the parameters of the Express solver so that we can get the most out of it. So there's a lot of tricky issues behind those planning exercises. Interesting outcomes that we take, actually physical production of the system in an hourly basis for different years. You can see that solar is producing more in this time of the day when there is sun in Chile, because of the model is adding more and more solar in the system. This is what happens in the 2030, and this gives rise to the duck curve, which is very popular now in California. This is how the Chilean duck curve would look like, And the Chileans have been using this to define flexibility requirements in order to define a flexibility product. So the Chileans, for example, they were looking to the flexibility products that the California market had, such as the flexible ramping product. This is something that may be familiar to some of you. And the Chileans have been trying to use this type of exercise to see how that product would behave in the Chilean market. And what comes along with the Chilean duck curve is actually the set of the dynamic probabilistic reserve requirements for the system. Here you have for the 24 hours and for different years of the simulation. And as we go towards 2030, as Chile gets more and more renewable generation, the time varying requirements for reserve in a probabilistic way, the dynamic probabilistic reserve, just increases a lot. So we have been seeing a lot of people giving a lot of value to this type of application. That's why I'm just sharing this with you. Locational marginal pricings and voltage levels in Chile, but this I will skip. And then Brazil has a commission, basically the planning company and the system operator, they have a commission a study under the GIZ budget, which was awarded to PSR in the tender process, basically to do the same thing for Brazil. But Brazil is interesting because of the country size and because of the presence of the hydro source, which enhances even more the capabilities of the stochastic dual dynamic programming method in handling multi-year storage resources. So the same type of outlook for Brazil. This is how the system would look like in 2000 and, I don't have the year here, but this is 2036, yes. So you see that today, actually this is 2036, yes, I'm sorry. That hydro, that's an interesting one. Hydro in 2036 in terms of capacity in Brazil would be something around 40% of the total pie. Today hydro accounts for 60%. So still hydro will be a major player in this country, but the penetration of wind and solar would increase quite a lot. Today Brazil has no more than 15 gigas altogether of wind and solar, and this is going to something around 30 gigas in 2036. Again, the same type of result for Brazil in terms of the daily production curve. And this is just for you to have a flavor on the processing time. Brazil, we have 200 hydro plants, 100 with a storage, 140 thermal plants. Basically, these are the ones that are modeled. And this is taking about 90 minutes to run a 10-year simulation in a full stochastic fashion, but stochasticity only on inflows, but running parallel processing in the 25 servers with a 16 processors. So basically, this is what we've been doing. Of course, to get to that is challenging because there are a lot of voodoos that you do here and there that are the kitchen behind this beautiful, plate of food. It's sometimes very messy because there is a lot of computational effort between here and there, and a lot of information exchange. The data sets are just incredibly high and big. And the dynamic probabilistic reserve, this is interesting. This is for the 12 months of one given year. And the difference between the blue and the red lines are for two different zones of the system. But as you can see, the reserve requirements on an hourly basis, they vary quite a lot for the system depending on the month. Okay, so it shows that this is really making a difference, and in my opinion, this will give rise to a new whole set of dynamics in the pricing of the reserve requirements in some systems. One thing that has been very interesting that we have been representing as well is the effect of climate change on inflows, which is related to the poster that is just outside by a student. This for Brazil is absolutely crucial because as you can see here in these charts, in the future, depending on how the different interactions on a climate level happens, inflows can indeed get severely reduced. And having inflows reduced because of climate change affects very much the way that the system expansion will get built up. So eventually this is one topic that will be a penalty against hydropower in the system. How we model that? Basically, we try to adjust the parameters of the periodic autoregressive inflow model so that we can transform it into a nonlinear model, generate the stream flow scenarios exogenally, and plug into the SDDP recursion to calculate the hydro operations policy. The advantages of the centralized approach of the planning, at least, are many, because it captures a lot of the synergies of the systems. It represents the contributions of each source for the multiple objectives. This is what we like very much. In terms of the synergic effect, you see here for Brazil the typical production profile of hydro, of biomass, of wind, and of solar, which allows the country to create a beautiful portfolio. And this portfolio has value in, for example, the definition of the capacity credits that Ben has just talked to us about earlier today. But this planning model, in an integrated way with the scenarios capturing the correlation, can indeed capture all these complementarities, and with this, all the objectives of the different technologies for the system supply. And finally, one topic that is very important for some countries in Asia and also in Latin America is the trade-off between energy cost and infrastructure, because we must compare all the time the cost of building sometimes cheap hydro but located far away from load centers against more expensive thermal generation located close to load centers with less transmission investments, and now renewables, which are cheaper than everybody else but which sometimes pose expensive network investment costs. So we tackle all of that in an integrated planning model. The limitation is, of course, that only the investor knows the true cost of each equipment, so the input data to the planning model may be incorrect. That's why going to centralized planning is not a good idea itself. And in my opinion, this was the main motivation for the creation of those long-term energy auctions that Professor Newberry spoke about earlier today, and that some of you have been speaking about. Why? It's because basically in these auctions, what the generators are being asked to do is to offer their annual remuneration, what they want to receive to build the asset and to keep the asset running, which is exactly the information that the planning model doesn't know. So an ideal auction could be given the information supplied by the generators for to build their assets. We could use an optimal generation transmission model to determine how the optimal generation mix for those multiple objectives represented in the model, how this would look like. So given one vector of investment, I could just see how the future system would look like, considering the different attributes that are valued by the planner, and then feedback, for example, this information to the non-selected candidates in the auction so that they could rebid their investment costs or annual remuneration requirements. And then by doing this, in theory, we could somehow factor in the private information of the investor with how the system would try to capture somehow the impact of this investment in the whole physical system itself, and feedback the cost of these constraints somehow to the generators in the upper level. What we are trying to do here somehow resembles, this is what we're not doing, at least in Brazil or not anyone else, but what we are trying to do is basically, what we would like to do is to relax these constraints here and see the multiplier associated to this as some sort of a Lagrangian relaxation of these constraints here, so that we can have as those parameters here, as those numbers here, the penalties associated to the violation of each of those constraints. In a way that, I could see this in a more conceptual framework, that each candidate generator in the system expansion contributes to multiple objectives. These objectives, they are defined here by these constraints of my planning model that I can, in theory, solve empirically with all that I explained earlier because of the cloud computing thing, the parallelization, and of course considering the simplifications that we have done, so that we can factor this to let the generators know which are the handicaps that will be used to compare the different technologies finally on the same basis. So what we are trying to do in the end of the day is to create a framework so that we can compare the different technologies on the same basis. I will not spend a lot of time on explaining how we do this in practice, because this is being so far just one exercise for us. But our motivation to solve this has come from the Mexican system when Mexico started to do their long-term generation auctions by saying, you offer as a thermal plant, you offer as a hydro plant, but the Mexican authorities, they pre-calculate handicaps that are used to imbalance the competition between these two technologies in the auction according to planning requirements. So they are trying to level the playing field between the different competitors using a mix of basically planning optimization models and an auction mechanism. What we did in Brazil, which was a bit related to this, but not entirely this, we are still working on this, was basically to factor into the levelized cost of energy all the different services and infrastructure costs of the generators. So our main proposal on how this big idea would translate into a number would be to decompose the LCOE of one generator of, instead of being just $30 per megawatt hour, that we can say how much this LCOE accounts for the energy itself and for the different types of services which are in the optimization model, but that can be bought or sold by the generator. And translating out of that into a number, the quality of the image here unfortunately is not so good, my apologies for that, but this institute's choice, that's how it says, we say this in English, has sponsored a study which is what are the real costs and benefits of the different generation technologies in Brazil. And the whole idea is to take, for example, one solar plant located in the southeast and say that the actual capital cost of this solar is X, plus this plant buys reserves which costs Y, plus imposes transmission cost in the system which is Z. On the other hand, it sells to the system some other services which are bought by other technologies, so that we can have a final number here, and this would be the LCOEs in total that could compare the different technologies on the same basis. And again, while we are doing this, we are trying to do this because we want to level the playing field in the competition in the auction, and we need to explain somehow to the society what is the actual value of each technology in terms of cost actually and value as well. We can incorporate subsidies and blah 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 and environmental constraints as well. So this is a little bit of the more controversial work that we've been trying to do. We've been trying to formalize this into a pure mathematical framework. We are not there yet, and this is the part that I will skip before concluding, but this again has come from the different auction approaches that we are seeing being actually implemented in different countries. And we think that just to finalize, the insights that we are trying to get with this type of exercise allows system planners and policymakers to be better informed or to have better information to define which are the products that can be acquired competitively, which are the products that should be acquired as a service, because we are seeing the whole system behavior in an integrated way. That's it. So my conclusions are not too different from what I have already spoken during the presentation. So the context here is the energy transition, which is posing new challenges for model-based scenario development with a higher spatial and time granularity, which is requiring joint efforts from different fields of expertise. I think that's why we are all here in data analysis, stochastic optimization, engineering, etc. And the higher penetration of renewables has been posing new challenge for market design, which has been affecting the model development. So this is a bit of what we're doing, and I wanted to share this experience with you for my nemesis to destroy me completely now. Thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, well, thank you for this nice talk, Luis. Every time I get the opportunity, I praise PSR for the closeness they keep with academia. They are always present in the congresses, and I think this is an example. So I'm happy that you came back to PSR. I was less happy with you in the government. So that's the first nemesis thing. Now, I have one comment regarding the reserve, the probabilistic reserve, dynamic reserve, because I keep saying that we should try to find a way of making a reservoir of wind, you know, because in all the optimization models, a very valuable tool is the future cost function, and it seems to me that, and this is for valuing the water that we have in the system, it seems to me as if indirectly this is the role of this probabilistic reserve, right? It's, and how is it impacted by the fact, do you have some final constraints or something like this? Because we know that for the water it is very important, this kind of final state of the reservoir. What happens with this constraint, this reserve? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, of course, Claudio. So thank you so much for your comment. So what we're doing is the following. Our main interest with the probabilistic reserve requirement for this type of exercise is to give the feedback for the planning model to decide the new generation reinforcement. So what we're doing is we have an external model that calculates the dynamic probabilistic reserve requirements in each time step, and then it feedbacks to the planning model so that the generation expansion decisions can be revised. Now, once you have the final expansion plan built, as in your model, and then we have a fully detailed operation system that optimize the system operation given the dynamic probabilistic reserve requirements. So it doesn't enter as some sort of explicit constraint. Actually, we do have a constraint, but it needs to be met by the existing generation fleet that has been already decided by the planning model. So it's a bit different from the reality of the water value termination function and this type of thing. Okay?
Thank you. Another comment, a question about these multipliers that you are trying to introduce in the model. When you have 0-1 variables, you don't have multipliers. This is the problem of this convex pricing and all that convex pricing. So you could also change the 0-1 variables by the linear relaxation and see what are the multipliers. No? I don't know. It's
that's the big point where we are stuck now. You are completely right, Claudia. Thanks for that. That's why I mentioned that so far what we're trying to do is to build a conceptual framework for that, so that we can explain what we would like to do in an ideal world, but we are not taking the multipliers today because exactly of the 0-1 variables. And in this exercise that I have shown you with the numbers, what we did was basically a set of incremental simulations with a full model of the system. So we don't have the major model with all the different attributes and taking all the dual variables out of it, or doing a LR, a Lagrange relaxation scheme to get the multipliers. We are not there, at least yet. We think it's going to be very challenging, but we feel from our practical experience in working in different countries that this is a topic that, although from a pure market perspective, this is like you should run away from this as the vampires run away from the the cross, but this is something that has become attractive to some people, because that's a framework to objectively measure what is at stake when making different generation investment decisions and transmission as well. Okay.
You are done with my role.
Thank you.
Time for one or two other questions. Yeah.
I have a question which might be perhaps very technical, but at some point you mentioned the aspect of multi-scale in time, going from days to hours to minutes or so. And I wonder, I mean, how does this impact the scaling of the models in the sense that you have a model hierarchy or a process? Because if time gets shorter and shorter, you may consider the model as a kind of time discrete instance of a continuous counterpart, but at some point in time when time's getting too large, it might no longer be faithful approximations, you need to do something else.
Yes.
So to what extent do you have such a hierarchy built into your system?
That's a great question. So yes, we do have a hierarchical arrangement. So the finest time step that we do is hourly, basically, and we have uncertainties which run on monthly steps, uncertainties which run on a weekly steps, and uncertainties which run on an hourly time step. So for example, for the hydro plants, for some of the hydros in countries where there are big reservoirs, we can work with a less fine scale for the inflow forecast, such as monthly time steps. But for the renewable production, for example, we need to go hourly because there is a rapid change. But we do have a hierarchical arrangement for that. Okay, because otherwise it would be very difficult to incorporate. You're completely right.
But do you know how to switch between those?
Yeah, we have our tricks. So we do this as follows. So first, in one approach, we do a different set of model runs with the different time steps, and then we have the connection, the functions, as Claudia was mentioning before. And in other runs that we do, everything is represented hourly, but we consider that across the different hours of the same week, for example, a given uncertainty a given uncertain parameter doesn't change if this uncertainty is represented on a weekly time steps. We do this, for instance, for fuel prices. For fuel prices, when you do fuel price uncertainty, we do fuel price uncertainty via a scenario tree, where each node of the tree is associated to different scenarios of the stochastic programming process. Okay. Thanks to you.
I would like to ask one question. These changes or not in the parameters and when you have an hourly time, when happens the changes or not to the parameters after a fact, I should say, an incident, or after a prediction?
That's a very good question. After a prediction. After a prediction. But this is decision, hazard decision models. It's something that is a very hot topic, and when doing stochastic programming research, we are doing today after the prediction.
Prediction of the using what Professor said earlier from the world markets, for example. Yeah. Predictions. I mean, from the world market, but also it depends on the uncertainty. Yeah, on the uncertainty. I mean, for example, for a few prices scenarios, you do have a very reasonable forecasts from the world market, but for the inflows, for example, you don't have a market for inflows forecast. So what you have is a historical record of inflows. Then there is a different model that projects the forecasts, and then that's a forecast. Yeah, certainties you count. Do you have a specific calculation for the error? The certainty.
Yes.
And if you can say in brief something.
Well, I can send you the papers actually, because the different uncertainties are modeled in different ways, and what is more important is to represent the correlation between them. Because, for example,
yes,
yes.
But
I have a question that relates to this. I think that might help. Esther Thomascar does this thing of multi-horizon scenario.
Yes.
Right. So you have sort of course uncertainty, like major effects, like climate policy and fuel prices and so on. Then for the hydro stuff, you have to operate within like a smaller, maybe 5-year horizon between investments. You do that sort of thing with SDDP? I mean, do you have like a course tree and then I didn't see that in your kind of flow chart.
No, actually we don't because when we do this multi-year to the infinite number of years simulation, the model is run as just a one single run decomposition, of course, but we don't predefine the number of the years as Acegas, for example, is doing when differentiating the different uncertainties.
So you have one SDDP that just goes
forever. That goes forever.
And then you have integer variables or whatever.
Yes. Actually, for the SDDP, and we are running SDDP. It's a convex thing, so we are not running the SDDIP. We do have a toy version of this model, but we're not there, commercially speaking, at least yet. And the uncertainty modeling is a bit tricky because. Coming back to your questions, there are uncertainties where you can perfectly capture via a periodic linear autoregressive model, which in turn is not useful for other uncertainties where this model was very good until recently. For instance, inflows because of climate change, because of the parameters change over time. You have heterocidicity in the stochastic process. This complicates quite a lot. And then what we're doing in this case is we basically use external models that produces inflows or whatever in any way that you want, and then you give to me as a Christmas gift the scenarios of the stochastic variables, and then we just plug them into the SDDP approach. This was a way that we did. Then we have to construct the trees, the transition, blah blah blah. But this was a way that we did to move a bit away from the linearity requirement of doing an integrated inflow model with the convex needs for the Benz decomposition.
You have sets of cutting planes for every node in that.
For every node, yes. And again, and just to finalize it, because your question is very important. We are only being able to do this because of the parallel processing and of the cloud computing. This has changed our life completely because otherwise we would get stuck on the computational time.
Okay. Any other?
If I may complete.
I think we're just about running out of time, so maybe we'll take it offline.
Yes,
take it offline. So thank you very much for the talk.
Yeah, thank you.